Hey everyone, how's it going? Had a few questions after my last couple of videos. People were asking about the size of paddocks that I'm using and kind of how I started, how I picked a number. Really, it's not rocket science. Just for some reason, it kind of took me a while to figure out a good way to do it. And once again, I was copying Greg Judy. So those of you who maybe haven't watched my other videos, I'm trying to manage this micro ranch, is what I'm calling it. I'd say it's not even a small scale ranch. We're smaller than small. So we're only on about 5 acres here. I'm trying to manage this like Greg Judy does. And I first found his videos on YouTube. It was about 4 years ago. He didn't even have a channel at that point. It was just a handful of videos of him getting interviewed by other people. And so I really started kind of researching him and the way that he started doing things. And anyway, that ended up he ended up starting his own channel that led me to obviously watch his videos daily. And basically what I did to get started, because I brought the first couple animals home and I just kind of gave them a large area because it was kind of that paralysis by analysis, right? I had read so much, I'd heard so much, I'd researched so much that it was almost contradicting on what I should do. And I was scared to kind of give him too much or too little. But he started putting out his own videos. In the old videos when he first started, a lot of the time he would tell you how many head he had, how much space he was giving them, and for how long. So just as an example, he would start out a video, his mob is moving, and he'd say, I've got 300 head going into 5 acres for whatever, 8 hours. So what I would do is, again, this isn't rocket science, it just for some reason it finally clicked in my brain one day. I would just say, okay, well, I'm not working on acres because I don't have that much land, I'm working on square feet, so let's convert everything over. So there's 43,560 square feet in an acre. I think that's right. Someone can double check my math. 43,560 square feet in an acre. I think that's right. So I would take that number, I'd multiply it by, again, let's use that same example. I'd multiply it by 5 because he's doing 5 acres. So I'd find out how many square feet were in 5 acres. Then I would take that number, I would divide it by the number of animals he had going in. So we'll call it 300. And then that would kind of tell me how many square feet he was giving each one of his animals for that 8-hour chunk. So then I would just take that number, and at this time I only had 3, and I would multiply it by 3, and then I would play on the calculator, length times width. I would take this turbo wire from Gallagher, that's what I'm using, and I would length times width, and I'd set up a chunk and a strip to give me that square footage that I came up with, and that's how I started. Obviously, you got to take into consideration where he was at, his rainfall, his weather, his pasture quality, even the animals he's using. And that was another adjustment I had to make. He's running 1,000 to 1,200 pound South Poles roughly. And when I first got these 3 females, they were, Dexter cows, they were 500 to 700 pounds max. So I really had to kind of shrink those numbers down even more, but it gave me a starting point, and I feel like it worked. At least it got me by. I don't feel like I made any mistakes, but just like he says, I would really look at both the animals and the pasture when they would come off of a strip. So I think it was a lot easier, and it still is. It's a lot easier for me to tell when something has been overgrazed than, undergrazed, underutilized. So I'd pull them off of a chunk and I'd walk it, and it was pretty easy to tell, okay, they ate way too much, they left very little, I'm gonna have to give them a little bit more next time, or just the opposite. They left too much. The other thing I would look at, and Greg always talks about it, is on the left side of your animals, there's you might hear it be called the death triangle. It's kind of right in front of their hip bone. It's actually the I'm trying to think, something fossum, parabellum, something fossum. I don't know. There's a scientific name for it. But I look at that. If that was sunken in, or if the animals were mooing at me the minute I got out of the house and they saw me, down here from the pasture, they saw me up at the house, then I know, okay, I really didn't give them enough because they are starving. Or just the opposite. If I couldn't get them to move, if I almost had to herd them into the next chunk, chances are I probably gave them too much, and it was just hard to kind of manage them. So again, it's pretty simple. It makes sense. It's obvious, right? I mean, just convert stuff over. But for some reason, it took me a while to figure out. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and I guess this is kind of important. If you learn nothing else from this video, the other thing I think that gave me a lot of problems with trying to figure out if I was overgrazing or undergrazing was when I first started setting them up, they were in very long, very narrow strips. Long, narrow strips promote uneven grazing. And this isn't my idea. This isn't my observation. I had heard about that. I had read it. But for some reason, I don't know. I forgot it. I didn't think it applied to me, or I just assumed I wasn't really doing long, narrow strips. Everyone has talked about this. Long, narrow strips promote uneven grazing. And that's just cattle's natural tendency to walk. And Greg says it all the time. Cows eat with 5 mouths. They're 1 true mouth, and then they're 4 hooves. So everything that they step on, they foul, they trample. They're not going to come back and eat it if they don't have to. So long, narrow strips was just making them walk too much. They'd walk, they would walk down to one end of this pasture, eat a little bit, then they'd walk back, maybe graze in between, but they'd basically just go from fence line to fence line. And they would be leaving a lot because they were walking all over it. Maybe a few of the cows would find an area of good grass, they'd start eating, and the herd boss, every herd has a herd boss, she would take off, she'd go to the other end of the strip, and the herd would feel like they'd have to follow her so they could be close. So what I started doing this spring was, I gave them shorter, wider strips. And that has been tremendous in kind of evening out how the grazing is. I mean, it almost looks like I came in here with a brush hog on some of this stuff. Now it has gotten away from me a little bit. It's pretty stemmy and starting to get a little mature. So they still are eating, evenly grazing a lot of the good stuff down below these seed heads. But it's night and day difference from having those long, narrow strips. So just their natural tendency to kind of do these lazy circles in this in this chunk. They're staying in close contact with each other, but there's enough space they don't have to they're running each other off today, but normally they get along a lot better. It just promotes a lot more even graze. So if I had done that from the beginning, I think I would have had an easier time figuring out just how much space I needed to give them. Long story short, when I started out, and again, we're in spring, so I'm doing things a little bit differently now, but when I started out, I was about half the space that I'm giving them now. I'm up to 4,000 square feet for the morning move, 4,000 square feet for the afternoon move. And right now that seems to be working really well. But again, I'm trying to fly them through these chunks because I just want them to take the top third of the plant, and then we need to move on because you can see, and this is my second time through this permanent pasture. This back quarter, I'd say, where they're just getting into now was very lightly grazed last time I came through. So this stuff is a little more mature. Like I said, it's a little taller, but taking the top third of the plant, moving them through, because I'm hoping that when they get done back to that tree line there, that then I will be able to turn back around and start over at this tree line here, basically where they started. And I forgot to look before I started this video on when they came off of that, but basically start over. We've had a lot of rain, we've had some good sunshine. I don't think that's going to be the case. Some of that grass is definitely going to be recovered, but I think I'm going to have to move them up to that front pasture up there. So again, I know this kind of seems super simple, but it's very easy to take everything you hear, everything you read, everything you research, and just kind of get lost in the information and confused on how you can make it work for such a small scale, a micro scale, like I'm calling it. So hopefully this helps some people out. I guess the biggest takeaways: just do something. Something is better than nothing. Try a size out, put your animals on it, watch them throughout the day. If they're overgrazing, make it larger next time. If they're underutilizing it, maybe tighten them up a little bit. Look at your animals, make sure they're happy, make sure they don't obviously look like they're starving, and then make those strips shorter and wider, and hopefully you'll have good results like I had.